Thank you. I am the director of a medical research institute, but I'm also an active researcher. I have a number of NHMRC and other funded grants, and I have a large research team with students and postdocs. So I'm spanning sort of several worlds at the moment. Just to give my story a little bit, I've got slides, you'll see them both there. I'm old by comparison with all of you. I did my finished school in 1973, and at the time I was always interested in medical things. I had the marks to get into medicine, but just to reflect on how far that we've come, I made the decision not to go into medicine because I was going to get married and have children and didn't want a career. I came from a very traditional household where my mother stayed at home, and I thought that going to university would be great fun. My father encouraged us all, boys and girls, to go to university. And so I chose a career that I thought would be a university course that I thought would be very interesting and that I could maybe do a bit of part-time while I was bringing up my family. When I have my 1,000-hour week now, and I look at that with great interest. But so I went into a new course at the time, which was a clinical psychology course, which had just opened that year at the University of New South Wales. It was called a BSc Psych Honours course. And in that, I actually found that as I went through it, all the things that I thought that I would have enjoyed about psychology, the guidance and the counselling and the training, I actually hated all of them because I discovered that I was a person who needed answers to questions, and I wanted to be able to ask someone a question and get a yes-no answer. And when I did my honours, I ended up doing it in hardcore animal learning because I could put a rat in a cage and see whether it went left or it went right. But I did discover that I loved research. I loved being able to design experiments, to ask questions, to test a hypothesis and to get an answer. And I thought, this is great fun. So I actually went straight on. I did very well in my honours. I went straight on and started my PhD, again in animal learning. And I was about 6 months into it where I woke up one morning and thought, yes, I'm good at this. Yes, I enjoy it. But is this the way that I want to spend the rest of my life, chasing rats around cages who are pressing bars and listening to bells? That no aspersions at all to people who do spend their lives doing that, but it certainly wasn't for me. And I've put up there, follow your heart. And I noticed that Laura said you made a career change. And I think that that's really important. You have to love what you do. You have to love, and you have to be able to get out of bed every morning and say, I'm excited about this. And if you don't, then you need to be looking at what the other opportunities are. And I hope that much of what you learn today is that there are enormous number of choices, and you have to find the right fit for the right people. And I tell that to every young group of people that I speak to, that it is, be brave, and if you don't love it, then do speak to the people to find out what other choices there are. So I knew that I did love research. I knew that I was good at research, but I decided that if I was going to do research, that I wanted to do research where I could actually make a difference, where I could see that the research that I was doing was going to have a tangible benefit. It was sort of a very warm, fuzzy, I wanted to do good things for mankind. And I was very fortunate that there was a professor in the School of Pathology when I knocked on his door one Friday afternoon randomly after looking down the notice board at the university and thinking anatomy, no physiology, no pathology, sounds good, and went into him. And he said, yes, you can do a PhD, but you can't do a PhD in my school unless you've done pathology and biochemistry and all these background subjects. So I basically went back to uni for 18 months and did all of these courses. And I vividly remember my first day in the lab. They put me into the lab from the beginning of that. And there was a rat who had just had the liver removed, and they were isolating DNA from a liver from a rat that had been treated with carcinogens. And there was this bucket of ice-cold ethanol and a young scientist with a glass rod who dipped it in. I don't know whether any of you are old enough to remember this, and they swirled the glass rod around and lifted it out, and there was this silver string, and it was DNA, and for me it was love at first sight. I thought, oh my God, this is the most exciting thing I've ever seen, and I never looked back from that moment, despite my psychology professor who, when I told him I was leaving, told me that I would crawl back through that door begging to be taken back into psychology. And I thought, if it's the last thing on earth I ever do, it will be crawl back through that door. But along the way, in my pathology course, I met a young medical student who I happen to still be married to nearly 40 years later. He was in the wrong class at the time, David. He's never forgiven himself for that. I finished my PhD in chemical carcinogenesis. Very rapidly after that, I learned one of the big joys of academia, and that is that you get to travel. And I got the opportunity to go and work in a lab overseas. I actually went to Israel for 3 months, and I learned a very new and exciting technique at the time of DNA gene transfer, where you could actually take DNA from a resistant cancer cell and put it into a sensitive cancer cell, and the sensitive cells became resistant, and there must be genes in that DNA. So these were very exciting times. It was long before molecular biology. And in 1984, I got the opportunity to be the first scientist recruited, the first postdoc at what parents and doctors had put the money together to open a lab to do research into children's cancer. And very shortly thereafter, we had our son, and then 2 years later we had our daughter, and then 10 years later, at 40-something, we went back and had our third daughter. So if anyone wants to talk about family and work-life balance, I'm very happy to do that. And I've put this slide up to show that my kids, my family, are incredibly important to me, and I think that that is one of the things about an academic career. It has flexibility in it. You're not tied to an office 9 to 5. You don't have to be in meetings. Obviously, you have to be in meetings, but if you want to be the sort of person that researches the internet at 3 o'clock at night while you're breastfeeding, you can do that. And if you're a late night person, you can do your experiments early. It's very flexible. It works around families. These are my kids, and this is us on a family trip last year. My husband's a clinician scientist, and we prioritise our family and our kids with our academic career, so you can have both of these, and that was a very important message I wanted to give you. What do I love about an academic medical research career? Well, I've been there nearly 40 years, so I do love the excitement of discovery. I love finding out things that nobody else has ever found out before, and you don't get an opportunity to do that unless you're in academia. For me, I'm very lucky I'm in an area of translational research. So we do bench to bedside research. We work very closely with the clinicians, and the things we discover into the lab, we turn into new treatments and new diagnostics, and we see the difference that they make to kids. And for example, a clinical trial that we've run has doubled the survival rate for kids at highest risk of dying from acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and that's a pretty good motivator to get you out of bed in the morning. And again, you only get the opportunity to do those sorts of things if you are in academic medical research. People select to be in academia. You don't do it for the money, you don't do it for the fame. So people who are in academia do it, they should be doing it because they love it, and they tend to be people of have a common passion for it, and so you get to meet some wonderful people. That's not to say you don't get to meet some arseholes as well, you do, but you mostly get to meet wonderful people who share your love of these things, discovery and translation. I've mentioned the flexibility. You make your hours your own. Yes, the busier you get and the further on in their career you go, the more there are meetings. But basically you can say, I don't want a meeting that day, I've got to take my kids to school that morning. Or I don't want to do this if you've got a flexible workplace, because the science runs around the timetable that you set for it. And that's an enormous luxury. The variety. No 2 days are ever the same in academia. You do an experiment, you don't know whether it'll work, you write a grant, you don't know whether you'll get it, you get a fantastic result and you go out and celebrate, you get a terrible result and you go home and have a glass of wine because there was a terrible result. But you meet people, you speak to collaborators, you do different things every day, and after 40 years, I have to tell you, I have never been bored for a minute in my career. The travel. Academia, medical research is a global enterprise. You cannot be a good scientist these days if you're not partnering nationally and internationally, and you can't do it all by the internet. You've got to get on a plane and meet your collaborators and look them in the eye and see whether they're the sort of people that you want to work with. You cannot tell that by emails. You've got to actually be with them. They've got to see you and understand that you're willing to make the effort to be there. So you see the world. I've been to some magnificent places for science, and it's a fabulous thing to do. And some of my closest friends are people that I've met internationally. I had a scientist who travelled for a very significant birthday last year for me across the world, because he said I wouldn't miss it for the moment. We've, been together at meetings for 30 years together in different parts of the world, and it's truly a wonderful way to make friendships. What do you need for an academic medical research career? Well, you definitely need an inquisitive mind. You do need power of critical thinking. You have to be prepared to work hard. It is not for the faint-hearted. You have to put the effort into finding these results. You do have to be logical and thoughtful. And if you're looking at these things and thinking that isn't me, then maybe an academic medical career isn't for you. It doesn't mean that there aren't other wonderful choices. You have to be able to write well and tell a story well. And you have to be able to write both in scientific format for papers and manuscripts, grants, but you also have to be able to write a lay description. So if you want to get a donor to support your research, they understand what you're talking about, and you have to be able to tell a good story.